In this video, I'm going to identify my 10 favorite wines from all of 2023. These are the best of the best. I'm going to start out with wine number 10 and work my way backwards to my favorite wine of the year. Coming in at number 10 is a Bordeaux from Rioja. This particular wine comes from the legendary 1961 vintage. Initially, I was a little bit concerned that this wine would be past peak, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that it was still within its drinking window. This was an outstanding effort for Rioja, much like the 1982 vintage, which is definitely another one of my favorites from this producer. Rioja is a second growth in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, but it's been somewhat inconsistent over the years. But this particular wine was showing extremely well, with dried red and black fruit, tobacco, cedar, and forest floor. It was very much a classic claret, with a little bit of austerity, but certainly quite elegant. If you're interested in trying some Rioja wines, you'll definitely want to consider the vintages from 2018 through 2022. They even made a 2021 that's received some critical acclaim, but 2022 is definitely their strongest. That one is currently available on futures, so definitely give that some consideration either now or once it's ultimately released. Les Crans is a Premier Cru Climat within the Chambolle-Musigny appellation in Burgundy. Pinot Noir vines cover the hillside directly above the village, where the terroir is good enough to make some of Chambolle-Musigny's top Premier Cru wines. The fruit for this next impressive wine, for example, comes from a parcel that's not far from the Grand Cru Climat Bonamar. This wine is from the 2019 vintage, so it's definitely the youngest wine in my top 25 countdown for 2023, but it's certainly well deserving of its spot as it comes from legendary Burgundy producer Domaine Roumier. I'm talking about the 2019 Domaine Roumier Chambolle-Musigny Les Crans Premier Cru. It definitely helped that this wine had been in the decanter for 90 minutes to 2 hours before I tasted it, but while it was very young, it was also extremely impressive and elegant. On the palate, this wine was extremely refined, with layered flavors and silky tannins. There was ample acidity to balance the pronounced flavor intensity, and there was a long, lingering finish. Definitely a wine I'd very much like to revisit in about 10 years or so after it's gained some additional complexity, but it's already an extremely enjoyable wine and very deserving of the number 9 spot in my top 25 wines of 2023. According to Franco Biondi-Santi, the characteristic of Brunello is its longevity. Nature is capable of producing beautiful things, you just have to wait. And so we did with this next wine, which finished number 8 in my top 25 wines of 2023. This is the 1985 Biondi-Santi Brunello di Montalcino Riserva. Biondi-Santi Riserva is a very special wine that's only produced in top vintages. As such, it's only been produced around 40 times, going all the way back to 1888. When it is produced, it's produced in very small quantities. Further, only about 60% of the production is released. An impressive 40% of the production, or just less than half, is set aside for future library offerings. The Biondi-Santi Riserva always includes a substantial percentage of fruit from the Il Greppo estate's prized old vines, which were planted way back in the 1930s. Biondi-Santi Riserva matures for around 36 months in large Slavonian oak, followed by 2 years in bottle before it's released. The 40% of the Riserva that's not released remains in l'Osteria until it's sold. In the meantime, they put a drop of beeswax on the cork to prevent oxidation, and they don't label the wine until it's sold. In l'Osteria, Biondi-Santi essentially has a wine vault that contains all the Biondi-Santi Riservas that they've ever produced and that they haven't sold yet, going all the way back to the 1880s. I tasted the 1985 Biondi-Santi Riserva as part of a vertical tasting of Reservas that also included the 1998, 1999, 2004, 2006, and 2016 Reservas. Amongst those who attended this tasting, opinions differed on which of the wines was their favorite. Certainly in the long run, I could see the 2016 ultimately being the best of the lot, And that's certainly a Biondi-Santi Reserva that I would highly recommend to wine collectors, as I think it's going to be absolutely phenomenal after it has some additional bottle age. But as much as I enjoyed the younger Biondi-Santi Reservas, for me the choice for wine of the night, and ultimately for which of these excellent Reservas would make my top 25, was clear by the end of the night. It was the 1985. For me, there's just nothing quite like a Biondi-Santi Reserva with decades of bottle age on it. Located in Pessac, Léognan, not far from the Bordeaux city center, La Mission Haut-Brion would undoubtedly be given strong consideration for first growth status if the 1855 classification of Bordeaux were to be revisited. The 1990 vintage in Bordeaux is one of my absolute favorites, and it's showing extremely well right now, especially for top wines such as the 1990 La Mission Haut-Brion. And so that impressive wine comes in at number 7 in my top wines of 2023. This outstanding wine is absolutely within its prime drinking window at the moment. After about an hour in the decanter, flavors and aromas included red fruit such as red cherries and red currant, but these were balanced by descriptors such as tobacco, smoked earth, warm gravel, cigar wrapper, and forest floor. Really an outstanding wine with a very long, complex finish. If you have this wine in your cellar, you definitely want to look for an occasion to open it, as it's not going to get much better than it is at the moment. There's certainly no rush to drink it, however, as it's in no danger of falling off either. While I certainly enjoy white wines, and I do my best to come up with a diverse list of wines for my top 25 each year, I don't taste that many white wines that have the gravitas to be included in the top 25, and especially in the top 10. This next wine, however, is well deserving of the number 6 spot in my top 10 wines of 2023. This is the very first Spanish white wine to ever receive 100 points from Wine Advocate. I'm talking about the 1986 Marqués de Murrieta Castillo y Gay Blanco Gran Reserva. Despite the fact that the fruit for this special wine was harvested way back in 1986, it was not released until December of 2016. In the meantime, it matured for around 21 years in neutral oak, then spent 7 years in concrete and another 3 years in bottle before it was ready for release. This special wine is primarily made up of Viura, which is also known as Macabeo, but there's a little bit of Malvasia as well. The vines that produce the fruit for this wine are planted at the highest point of the Marqués de Murrieta Castillo y Gay estate and were planted way back in 1945. This wine is made in an oxidative style, and it's extraordinarily complex. I enjoyed it 2 times in the past year with consistent results. This is a wine that evolves dramatically over the course of an evening, and pretty much every time you check on it, you'll get something different. This is a mind-blowingly complex wine, and one that I highly recommend. If you're unsure whether or not you'd like to invest in this wine, then I would definitely encourage you to try some other white wines from Marqués de Murrieta first to make sure that you enjoy them. They have some extraordinary white wines that are under the Capellania name, including the Capellania Gran Reserva Blanco, which are also truly exceptional, but which can be had for a fraction of the cost of this wine. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Due to the difficult weather conditions in Champagne, it can be a real challenge to produce a high-quality prestige champagne, even in a strong vintage. So rather than create a vintage champagne from a single vintage, Laurent Perrier's Grand Siècle instead seeks to recreate the perfect vintage by blending wine from 3 different declared vintages. For example, Grand Siècle number 20 includes fruit from the 1999 vintage, the 1997 vintage, and the truly exceptional 1996 vintage. I'm a huge fan of the Grand Siècle program and always look forward to new releases of Grand Siècle, and I was very pleased that James Suckling awarded the number 26 the Wine of the Year for 2023. I very much enjoyed that wine, But Laurent Perrier also has a special program called Les Reserves. Les Reserves involves Grand Siècle bottlings that undergo additional lees aging in Magnum. So for example, I was able to taste the Les Reserve iteration number 20 from Magnum earlier this year, and that special wine spent 20 years on lees before being released. This was my first experience with this champagne, and it was definitely an eye-opening one. This champagne featured the best of both worlds. It was incredibly fresh and youthful due to the large format, but yet had extraordinary complexity due to the extended lees aging. Lopez Heredia is a family-owned winery that's located in the heart of Rioja in Aros, Spain. Lopez Heredia was founded way back in 1877 and is certainly one of the oldest and most traditional producers of Rioja. It's particularly well known for producing Tempranillo-based wines that it ferments and matures for an extended period of time in neutral oak prior to release. Lopez Heredia is known for producing wines that are extraordinarily age-worthy. It's extremely difficult to locate them, however, as even when I was in Rioja and other parts of Spain, specifically seeking out older vintages of Lopez Heredia, it was very difficult to find them. This is particularly true for the Viña Tondonia Gran Reserva bottlings, as Viña Tondonia is the crown jewel vineyard at Lopez Heredia. And so I was absolutely ecstatic earlier this year when I went to Los Angeles and I was able to find the 1968 Lopez Heredia Viña Tondonia Gran Reserva Rioja at that restaurant. Of course, we were a little bit concerned about the provenance of this wine and wanted to know some details about it before we pulled the trigger and ordered it. But the sommelier and the owner of the restaurant explained that this was a bottle that they purchased directly from the winery during a visit to Rioja. The bottle also appeared to be in pristine condition, so we went ahead and ordered it, and it turned out that the most challenging part of the night was just getting it open with the sealed wax capsule that was on it. But once the hard part was over and we were able to pour this wine, it took about 15 minutes or so to open up, but then it was absolutely incredible. And this wine did not fall off despite being open for more than 2 hours or so. A truly impressive wine and one that's extraordinarily age-worthy. The first time I tried the legendary 1982 Pichon Lalande, I was absolutely blown away. That wine was in a league of its own, and it had simply outclassed every other wine I had had to that point. It overwhelmed my senses like no other wine had done. Ever since that first magical experience, I've done whatever I reasonably could to taste the 1982 Pichon Lalande at future opportunities. And so it was a no-brainer for me to travel to Chicago to participate in a 21 vintage vertical tasting of Pichon Lalande that featured the 1982 Pichon Lalande as the headliner. Fortunately, both of the bottles of the 1982 Pichon Lalande that they were tasting that night were ex-Chateau, as I've discovered that ex-Chateau bottles or bottles from large formats are definitely the best way to go at this point in time, as the 1982 Pichon Lalande is no longer in its prime drinking window, and some bottles in 750s that have not been well preserved may be disappointing. But when you are able to find either a large format or a bottle that's been well preserved, the 1982 Pichon Lalande is more than capable of delivering an exceptional and memorable drinking experience that you won't soon forget. And so the 1982 Pichon Lalande finished number 3 in my top 25 wines of 2023. If you're looking for more information about this outstanding producer, be sure to check the links in the description below, as I recently did a comprehensive and detailed video on Pichon Lalande. While Cheval Blanc is located in Saint-Émilion, it's right on the Palmaral border, and the terroir for around 1/3 of its vineyards is quite similar to the top estates in Palmaral. This helps to explain why Cheval Blanc's wines can be so opulent. In addition, Cheval Blanc's vineyards have 3 distinct soil types, and by blending fruit from each of these 3 distinct soil types, Cheval Blanc's winemaker is able to achieve tremendous complexity. We were extremely fortunate that someone contributed the 1990 Cheval Blanc to our 9-bottle double-blind tasting of top Bordeaux from the 80s and 90s earlier this year. The 1990 Cheval Blanc received a perfect 100-point score from Decanter, and it's easy to see why. While the nose was world-class, The palate was absolutely breathtaking. This wine featured a silky, velvety texture, and it caressed your tongue with waves of vibrant, pure, complex fruit. The finish lasted for close to a minute. While it was intensely concentrated, it was also light and ethereal, which is a phenomenon I like to describe as intensely ethereal. And so this wine finished in a two-way tie with Pichon Lalande as wine number 3 in my top wines of 2023. Way back in 1912, Woodrow Wilson was elected President of the United States, the Titanic crashed into an iceberg and sank in the Atlantic Ocean, and the grapes for an absolutely monumental 1912 Verdelho Madeira Reserva were harvested. 1912 was a legendary vintage for Madeira, and the grapes for this impressive wine came from the family's estate vineyard and were highly praised as being a source of tremendously high-quality Verdelho. This is certainly a premier bottling of Madeira, and it's one that's classified as a Fresqueira, which is the term used for a vintage Madeira that's aged in wood for at least 20 years before it's released. This was an absolutely stunning wine that had pronounced aromatic and flavor intensity. Flavors and aromas included honey, molasses, dates, rancio, leather, mixed spice, orange peel, lavender, smoked meat, and much more. There was some sweetness, but it was definitely offset by ample acidity. The finish was extraordinarily long and complex. As incredible as this 111-year-old wine was on its own, it made for an absolutely mind-blowing match with the restaurant's signature dessert, which was sticky toffee pudding, with a toffee sauce that was poured tableside. Several times in my top 25 videos, I've referred to the 9-bottle double-blind Bordeaux tasting that featured top Bordeaux from the 1980s and the 1990s. That tasting was certainly one of the wine highlights of the year, as 4 bottles from my top 25 came from that 9-bottle tasting. I've already discussed 3 of those bottles, namely the 1982 Lynch Bage, the 1990 Le Mission Haut-Brion, and the 1990 Cheval Blanc. When you first participate in some of these tastings where you have 8 or 9 high-quality Bordeaux like this one, and they're all poured double-blind, it can be extremely overwhelming. And so what I learned to do is to go through each of the different wines and nose them and just smell them to try to get some familiarity with the wines and to form some first impressions and also make sure all the wines are sound. So in this tasting, there were 9 glasses in front of me and I had been smelling them one by one, but once I got to number 5, it was an absolute showstopper. Just by smelling it, I could tell immediately that that was going to be a front runner and the potential wine of the night. It really stood out and it was absolutely perfect in every single way. There were refined, aristocratic aromatics of red currant, blackberry, tobacco, pencil lead, cedar, leather, violets, forest floor, and much more. So at this point, I hadn't even tasted this wine, but I knew just by nosing it that it was definitely going to be a standout and most likely going to be my choice for wine of the night. And sure enough, it actually blew away all the other competition, despite the fact that the other wines were extremely formidable and impressive in their own right. This wine was not the most powerful or the most concentrated wine of the lineup, but it was the most elegant and refined, and it was practically perfect in every single way possible. I even have a friend who enjoys this producer, but it's not his favorite producer, because he said that he thinks that the wines are too perfect, and he finds wine more interesting if it has some slight idiosyncrasy or some slight imperfection. But unlike my friend, perfect is good enough for me, so I'm pleased to announce that my wine of the year for 2023 is the 1996 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. If you'd like to learn more about Chateau Lafite Rothschild, or if you'd like to see part 1 of this top 25, be sure to check the links in the description below.